Do do do, theme song. Do do do, I'm broke so this is my theme song. Do do do, just imagine this is an awesome theme song. Do do, theme song. I just want to give you a quick heads up before the video starts that I won't be giving a lot of eye contact to the camera. This is because I still can't afford to get myself a teleprompter. So I apologize ahead of time for the lack of eye contact, and if you like, I'll give it to you now. Hey. Hello, welcome to Left of the Box News Bites, or in this case, news chunks that you'll have a hard time digesting and will want to poop out. Bonjour, bienvenue, I'm Sandy. April has been a rough month for Ontario pandemic-wise. This is because we have Doug Ford as premier. I could have made a video every day about how Doug was messing this up, but I'm not yet at the point I can get these out quickly. What I will do instead is give you a recap of how this month unfolded as fast and as concise as possible. Despite all my research and time I've put into this, there are details I've missed given the sheer volume of the mess. I'm going to try to keep this as light as possible, but this is a heavy topic and, if you're human, it will cause a lot of rage. Links to all the news articles I reference will be in the description box below. Since I will be hammering through a lot of information, I recommend watching this video more than once on different devices, on different days. At the beginning of April, the third wave of the pandemic was well underway. Doug Ford decided too late to put the province into its third lockdown. Here's how it went. According to doctors, the pending catastrophe could have been avoided had Doug Ford acted sooner, and they said that paid sick days were necessary to help control the new wave of infection. The latest modeling was showing Ontario could have up to 10,000 cases per day by the end of May if nothing changed. Despite this modeling being presented 2 months earlier, and a letter from 153 ICU doctors imploring the province to take tougher action, Doug waited a couple of weeks until the ICU beds were full before announcing an emergency brake shutdown, which permitted non-essential retail to remain open. This happened on April 1st. Here is what Yorkdale Mall looked like on April 3rd. This is what Doug said on April 6th in response.
Over the Easter weekend, I saw the same news coverage as you did. Big groups of people in malls and other retail settings. Too many people gathering indoors. You go by Yorkdale, you couldn't get a parking space. It was absolutely jam-packed. And I truly was hoping that, people wouldn't be going in there to the volume that we saw. Folks, this variant is taking off. And please, when you can, follow all protocols. Make sure when you can, stay at home. We understand you got to get out, get fresh air, God bless you, but do it responsibly. But a lot of people were going into the malls and doing their little wander around and coming out with no bags. So that tells me they were just out for an evening or a daily jaunt. You can't do that. If you have an essential item that you have to buy, and, I'm sorry, but going to the malls is not essential. What's essential is going to buy food, going to buy medicine out of the pharmacies, and getting your vaccines.
You don't get to wag your finger at people going to the mall. You allowed to remain open. Due to the exploding case count, an emergency stay-at-home order was made to start on April 8th, which was a week overdue according to doctors. From CBC, the new order requires all Ontarians to remain at home except for essential purposes. Non-essential retailers will be limited to curbside pickup and delivery. Access to malls will be limited to specific purposes such as curbside pickup. Big box stores and retail will also be limited to selling essential items such as groceries, household supplies, pharmacy items, and personal care items. Schools and childcare will remain open in the public health regions that permit them to be open. The province says new measures will be introduced following the spring break next week, because of course, why not wait longer? Including asymptomatic testing at assessment centers between April 12th and April 18th, confirmation of self-screening of COVID-19 symptoms upon arrival to school, and refresher training on safety protocols for all students and staff. Residential evictions will also be halted. Yeah, about that. Here's what Ford said.
During a stay-at-home order, residential evictions will once again be suspended because no one should live in fear of losing their home.
You're right, Doug. No one should have to live in fear of losing their home. You didn't stop it, you've only delayed it. While evictions are suspended, landlords can still go to the Landlord-Tenant Board and have hearings, so when the lockdown is over, they can throw people out on the streets. People who haven't been able to work due to the pandemic, people who can't afford to spend 125% of their paychecks on out-of-control rent, people who fell on hard times, people with disabilities, seniors with fixed incomes. None of them should have to live in fear of losing their homes. All of them do because of you and the landlord-friendly governments before you. And just to make it clear what Doug really thinks of evictions, from evictionsontario.ca. In late April 2021, the Ontario government is scheduled to introduce Bill 276, the Supporting Recovery and Competitiveness Act. Buried in the bill is an amendment to the Statutory Powers Procedure Act, which sets fines up to $25,000 for recording and sharing online tribunal hearings proceedings. As the Ontario Landlord and Tenant Board continues to churn out hundreds of evictions orders each week, the government is moving to eliminate exposure of mass evictions by targeting tenant organizations with massive fines. Since the government moved the Landlord-Tenant Board hearings online and effectively behind closed doors, working class people have organized to challenge and expose the increasingly secretive eviction process. In response, the LTB has ordered evictions against hundreds of tenants without them being present in as little as 60 seconds, obstructed tenants from obtaining legal advice from tenant duty counsel lawyers, forced tenants' children to act as interpreters at their own eviction hearings, and booted dozens of observers from its virtual hearing rooms. He wants to make it so people can't expose the injustice of the process. Let's go over what was allowed to remain open. Let's see, work, school, hobbies, caring for animals, exercise, so everything is still open except non-essential businesses, which tend to be small businesses and dine-in restaurants that have already been hit hard by this pandemic and lack of support from the government. Of the retail stores that can remain open, people are restricted in what they can buy. Signs like this one went up in Dollarama. Restricted articles, school, office, clothing, kitchen, books. Books are not essential, apparently. So you're not allowed to buy school or office supplies, and yet schools and offices are still open? For many low-income people who rely on Dollarama, this is a kick in the teeth because some of these items are essential to them. Why is the government allowed to determine for other people what is essential in a store they have access to when most people in government live a life of privilege and have no comprehension of what the average person needs to get by? I can't imagine that by prohibiting products from this list, it will cut down on trips to the store, as almost no one goes to the store for just a couple of these items. So if they're already at the store, how does not buying these items help stop the spread of the virus? All it does is hurt businesses and the individuals in need of those products. What could remain open and was made to be closed was based on the business interests of Doug's buddies. As you can see from this image here, workplaces are the #1 source for spread of the virus, followed by education, 2 places which are still open under Doug's rules. If he was serious about stopping the spread, he would shut down schools and all workplaces except those needed to keep the province running. And he would do this by making sure people got the income support they needed so they didn't lose their home and could still afford to buy food. All of the places remaining open paid sick days so no one goes into work with COVID. This started to become so bad that for the first time, the hospital for sick children established a temporary ICU ward for adult COVID patients aged 40 and under to help ease the burden on other hospitals. Even with all of this going on, Doug accused those calling for his government to ensure paid sick days of playing politics and said that people should use the federal program that most people can't for various reasons I touched on in my SERB videos. Doug says vaccines were going to hotspots. Let's look at that. As you can see in the first image, the darkest red is where the most cases are, and in the second image, the darkest red is where the highest vaccine rates are. As you can see, they do not overlap. The vaccines are not going to the hottest of spots. Instead, they are going to wealthier neighborhoods. The spots with the most cases are usually low-income earners who work in essential services, who can't take time off work because there are no sick days, and they tend to be people of color. There are also indications that the areas Doug sent vaccines to was political in nature. His riding had pharmacies with vaccines. It was declared a hotspot despite being below average for cases, whereas these ridings were left out. From the Jeff You Know, Map 1, the 20 pharmacies approved by the Ford government to dispense AZ vaccines. Map 2, Hamilton Center riding boundaries overlaid, showing it contains 0 of the pharmacies despite higher caseloads and population density. Who's the MPP there? NDP leader Andrea Horwath. As you can see from this image here, 4 PC ridings with lower than average case rates have been designated as hotspots, whereas 3 NDP ridings and 1 Liberal riding that have high COVID rates have not been declared as a hotspot. Let's not forget how bad the third wave is. This graph shows the daily cases. The start of the graph is from March of last year. The third wave towers over the first 2, and yet people aren't taking it as seriously. This is partly because of the half-measured lockdowns people have already been put through, which has caused people to become fatigued from the situation. Plus, people aren't receiving the same help from the federal government as they were when COVID first started, so they are forced to go to work. Conspiracy theories and anti-maskers have had time to spread misinformation, and new, more contagious variants are in the mix. If Doug had done proper lockdowns at the start of this and provided people with what they needed so they could stay home, we wouldn't be in this current situation. Next indication things are out of control. Hospitals put a halt to all non-emergency surgeries as COVID patients filled ICUs. On April 9th, Doug received his AstraZeneca vaccine on camera.
He can't even help but laugh. Okay, here we go.
You're wearing a nice white shirt.
Yeah.
You want to just hold it?
Yeah, I'll hold it up.
Okay.
What? I'll look the other way.
Okay.
That's it.
You want to just hold that console?
Yeah.
All done? How was it?
Good. Yeah.
He jokes about dying from, he is not essential to running this province, and he gets it. And in fact, we'd be better off without him running the province, and he jokes about, I need a drink. Oh, that's sweet. I should have tried that off screen first. Oh. Whew. Wow. Geesh. Around April 13th, the province shuts down schools for in-person learning nearly halfway through the month. Despite grim warnings about community spread, childcare centers for infants, toddlers, and preschoolers stay open. Why? Because it's important their parents are still able to go to work and not have to stay home and look after the kids. It should be noted that Toronto's top doctor, Dr. Eileen Davila, did the right thing earlier in the month after reviewing the data and used her special Section 22 power, which allows a medical officer of health to require a person to take or refrain from taking any action in respect of a communicable disease, to issue an order to shut down all Toronto schools. This move most likely saved lives, and the province had nothing to do with it. On April 15th, on the House floor, this happened.
Mr. Speaker, talk about doing a job. Our team, the frontline healthcare workers, the docs, the nurses, paramedics, everyone, have been working around the clock for well over a year, literally 24/7, every single day, trying to support the people of Ontario. And the negative talk that comes out of the leader of the opposition, again, does a disservice to all of the frontline healthcare heroes, all the people of Ontario. And it's ironic, it's coming from a person that has done diddly squat, nothing, zero, sat nor seat, and sits there and criticizes the hard work of the healthcare workers and the doctors that give me advice. Why doesn't the leader of opposition do something? Do something positive once in a year and a half, because it's not even in her mindset to be the final
Speaker, the people of Ontario deserve so much better than this. Folks are losing their lives. People are getting sick at unprecedented numbers. 650 people, 659 actually, in the ICU today, struggling to breathe. The virus continues to grow. Over 4,700 people in Ontario now have the virus. We've given this Premier all kinds of advice. We've asked him, we've begged him to listen to the experts, to follow their lead, to do what they're telling him to do. And instead, he walked us right into this third wave, into this rampant spread of variants of concern. And now, he seems to think that it's not his responsibility, that it had nothing to do with what he did or didn't do, the actions that he refused to take. Take the actions necessary. Take the actions that the experts are telling you to take. Bring in paid sick days, bring in paid vax time, and stop the spread of this virus. Will the Premier do that?
He's blaming Andrea Horwath for not doing his job. It's not her job to fix your mess. If you want her to, move out of the way, you entitled little... Andrea has no power to change anything, and calling you out on your lack of effectiveness is her job. Every time she has brought up a vote for 6 days, you have voted it down. Oh. Also around this time, overburdened hospitals start transferring patients to long-term care homes. From City News. Overburdened Ontario hospitals will begin transferring some patients to available beds in long-term care homes. The goal is to move at least 1,500 patients across the 626 long-term care homes in the province. Currently, there are around 6,000 empty beds in long-term care system. However, doctors and advocates are cautioning against the move and raising concerns around staffing. It's a disaster waiting to happen, Dr. Vivian Stampatop said. Staffing has been decimated in long-term care homes. We still don't have minimum staffing standards in our long-term care homes, said palliative care physician Dr. Amit Era. You're not going to get the quality of care that you get in hospitals, period, Dr. Stampatopoulos noted. 6,000 available beds. That seems like a lot. Oh, right, because everyone died. And what good is more beds when there isn't the medical staff needed to look after everyone? Trudeau offers help from 680 News. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says the federal government is prepared to deploy the Canadian Red Cross to help Ontario with their mobile vaccination teams and send aid to hospitals and long-term care homes, something the Premier says isn't needed at the moment. The Ford government quickly responded to Trudeau's proposal, saying the province has a supply issue, not a capacity issue. While we appreciate the Prime Minister's offer, unless it's matched with increased supply, we do not need the Red Cross at this time for the administration of vaccines in Ontario, said Doug Ford's office in a statement. This comes as Ontario pleads with other provinces to send nurses and other health workers as it buckles under the surging COVID-19 infections. In a letter to all provinces and territories, the Ford government notes it's short thousands of nurses. Ontario was expected to be short 4,145 nurses in the hospital sector alone over the next 4 months, Deputy Minister of Health Helen Angus said, while asking her counterparts for 620 health professionals, including nurses and respiratory therapists. Trudeau did offer help with equipment, and there absolutely is a capacity issue, as I just mentioned, how people are being transferred to long-term care homes. And if there is no capacity issue, why is Doug begging for more nurses? How did we get so short on nurses? Oh, right, because Doug has been decimating the healthcare system since he's been in power. Meanwhile, things are getting so bad, field hospitals are required in Toronto, again from 680 News. Carl 680. Tents being set up outside Toronto Western, Toronto General Hospital to help ease crowding in ER waiting rooms. Staff says lots of COVID patients coming in and they need more space. The field hospital set up at Sunnybrook Hospital will reportedly start accepting patients next week. And there was this dire warning from Dr. Callie Barrett.
This is like the worst case scenario in terms of how I ever imagined I would be practicing critical care medicine.
That is terrible that you're all in that situation. It's terrible that we're in this situation. Triage, let's talk about that. Because Dr. Williams said, look, I'm just going to get his words here. We need to look at capacity, not just beds, but staff. No one wants a triage system. We don't want to go there, but it is a reality. It is something that could be very real very soon.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So in sort of broad statements, I mean, I have not seen the most recent triage document, and quite frankly, I'm not sure it's even been completely approved yet. But in broad statements, what it would mean is, let's say I had 2 patients that were in the emergency department who were critically ill, and I had only room to accommodate one more. I would be asking a group of independent clinicians to make an assessment on who is most likely to benefit from that ICU bed based on their past medical history, how sick they are at that moment in time. And the person who is most likely to be alive and survive that critical care admission would be the one that gets the bed. And the other one would be offered the full medical care that we could give up to critical care. So it might mean oxygen, antibiotics, medication that would help. But if that patient's not doing well and they're in pain and suffering, we would offer palliative care. And it would mean that there would be people who will die who otherwise would have survived or would have had a higher likelihood of surviving had they gone to critical care. And I can't, this is the second time I've described what a triage scenario would look like to sort of media. I spoke about this last night on a Twitter Spaces event. I can't believe I'm saying these words. I did not go into medical school and become a critical care physician to do this kind of work. And the moral distress that this is going to create for my colleagues and my profession as a whole is people will quit, people will leave, and this is going to be horrific and devastating for us all, but way more horrific for the patients and their families and their friends.
This is a war zone. What you described sounds like a war.
I really can't think of a better analogy. And the really tragic thing is that those in the line of fire are the people who are most vulnerable in our society. So right now, the people getting sick with COVID-19 are not the wealthy people who can work from home who are probably getting vaccinated. The people who are getting sick with COVID-19 are the people who have no choice but to leave their house and expose themselves to the virus at work. And they may or may not have been vaccinated, and they may or may not have the agency and the social capital while they go to work to speak up if they're in an unsafe environment. And when they do get sick, they're probably going home to a very crowded household with multi-generations living in the same building or household. And if they do get sick, the likelihood that they're going to infect everyone that they live with is very high. I took care of a patient this week in the hospital who had COVID-19 and was desperate to leave against medical advice while he was on 100% oxygen because his wife, his wife's mother, and his 6-year-old child all had COVID at home. And he was freaking out that his wife couldn't handle looking after everyone in his family. Entire families are getting sick with this. And it is affecting the most vulnerable in our society. It is infecting those with the least social capital to be able to speak up for themselves, those with the least amount of representation right now in cabinet and in government. And it's completely unmasked the inequities in our society. And I'm angry, and I'm sure you can see the anger in my voice. Yeah. It is not the way I ever expected things to happen in this country. I'm going to leave it at that.
She could never imagine our country would get like this. This is what happens when people stop paying attention to what our politicians are doing because politics is frustrating or boring. These failures are years in the making. Our healthcare system is being privatized bit by bit, and if we don't do something about it now, these types of tragedies will only get worse. And I'll leave it at that. New restrictions are implemented. There are now checkpoints at the borders of Quebec and Manitoba, and this from CBC News. Public health experts are raising their eyebrows at Ontario's decision to restrict outdoor gatherings, saying the latest evidence suggests the measure won't do much to cut down on COVID-19 transmission. Premier Doug Ford announced Friday that only members of the same household would be able to congregate outdoors as part of a suite of measures meant to bolster the province's losing battle against the coronavirus pandemic. Police have been granted sweeping new powers to enforce the rules. They'll be able to stop cars or pedestrians at random to check their reason for being out and request their home addresses. So, playgrounds where kids can go and play while social distancing are closed, but childcare centers where they are sitting close together in a room are open. Basically, under the new measures, all the places where outbreaks occur are still open, and the places where you're less likely to catch COVID are closed. About the new police powers, disaster. So Doug has told police they're allowed to stop people anywhere and ask them personal questions. Right away, many police departments said they would not be doing this. And when the police departments are publicly going against a conservative leader, you know it's bad. But how are we supposed to trust them? You mean cops like these ones escorting anti-lockdown protesters? I seriously doubt this large gathering consists of people from the same household, or cops like this one, who hugged anti-maskers after telling Sean O'Shea, a reporter on scene, that his presence was upsetting the protesters, so it was his fault they got in his face earlier. And what about the departments that are more than happy to comply, like the OPP, who have a long, horrible history of harassing Indigenous peoples? As soon as this was allowed, there were people taking to Twitter saying they, or people they knew, were being stopped by police. The thing the people being stopped all had in common? They weren't white. I feel the police departments were put into a no-win situation. Many are aware of the public opinion of them and didn't want to exacerbate that, and stopping people for simply being out of their homes goes against the Canadian Constitution. By not following Ford's orders, they are going against their civilian authority. These are the consequences to elections people often don't pay attention to when they vote for people like Ford. By forcing departments into impossible to enact orders, it undermines the system and makes it easier to break in the future. Politicians need to be held accountable for the policies they want to enact, even if those policies weren't actioned by the people required to do so because these policies were blatantly wrong. There was so much backlash about the playground closures and the new police powers that Doug Ford had to back away from them. But it was too late for him. His complete epic mess made international news. An opinion piece in the Washington Post called "Ford Must Resign" ripped him apart, not just for the mistakes of now, but pointed out how he was never suited to be premier. This article began to trend, and Doug Ford became quiet. He didn't show up to work on the Monday or Tuesday after the disastrous turnaround on the weekend, and rumors were flying. It then came out that Doug had been exposed to someone who had been tested positive for COVID, which was found out on the Tuesday evening, so it doesn't explain why Doug was a no-show on work on the Monday. My theory? He's a coward. He was called out by the people he respects, Americans, and he felt like he would be verbally attacked should he go into work. This from the same bully who has hurled misogynistic and racist insults across the House floor, and like most bullies, is deep down a scared little baby. So here is where Doug's nuclear hypocrisy starts to radiate to critical levels. Because he was exposed to COVID, even with negative test results, he is doing the recommended precaution and taking advantage of paid sick days. The same thing he continuously denied working people of Ontario. 23 times he has said the people don't deserve it. 23 times he has gone against the advice of doctors. 23 times he has refused to do the simplest of things which would have saved lives. Well, it was only voted on 21 times during the pandemic. While in isolation, he will continue to earn a salary of just over $800 a day. A day! In 2 days, Doug makes more than what people on ODSP are forced to live off of for the entire month. You goddamn stupid you can go to hell and rot. There you can turn up and a porcupine and you need to go away and never Ontario alone, you goddamn stupid. This is ridiculous. How dare you do this to the province? You are killing people, you piece of During his time off work, Doug was struggling to learn how to use a laptop. He's premier of a province and stumped by a laptop. No wonder we're in this mess. I'm better qualified to run this province. Doug's Twitter account released this Trump-like post photo of him hard at work, writing on a blank piece of paper. Here, I filled in the blanks. With mounting calls for his resignation, Doug finally held a press conference.
We moved fast to put in measures in place to reduce mobility. But we moved too fast. And I know that some of those measures, especially around enforcement, they went too far. Simply put, we got it wrong. We made a mistake. These decisions, they left a lot of people very concerned. In fact, they left a lot of people angry and upset. I know we got it wrong. I know we made a mistake. And for that, I'm sorry, and I sincerely apologize. Because as Premier, as I said right from the beginning, the buck stops with me. Again, I'm sorry, and I apologize to each and every one of you. I'm sure that you may have noticed that I'm speaking to you today while in isolation. I experienced a workplace exposure from a member of my team who, despite their best efforts, tested positive for COVID-19 earlier this week. And I assure you, it is not lost on me that unlike many people, I'm able to isolate and continue working. For too many people right now, that's not the case. And during these unprecedented times, regardless of where you work or what you do, if you're forced to go into isolation or quarantine, your job should be safe. I know that these lockdowns, they've been devastating for people. It means telling someone they can't see their family or take a vacation. It means forcing someone to close their business, lose their paycheck. It means telling someone not to properly celebrate a wedding, or sadly, be able to mourn the loss of someone we love. For some, it's been dealing with isolation at home, the struggles with mental health and addiction. For others, it's been going to work, despite the stress of working in a job that puts you and your loved ones at a higher risk of getting COVID. I hear it every day, every single day. People telling me their stories, the stories that could make you cry, families that haven't been able to hold hand. Hold on, folks. I apologize. Hold the hand of their mom or dad as they passed away because of COVID-19 restrictions in hospitals. Healthcare workers who've been pushed to the absolute limit, working to save lives. I want you to know that I hear you. I understand you're going through. I understand your frustration. This experience, this pandemic, is something that has affected every single person in Ontario. But folks, please understand that making these decisions, asking more from you when I know that each of you have already given so much. It's never easy, and it weighs on me heavy every day. And let me say that the greatest honor of my life was to be elected to be your premier. I work for you, my boss is you, the people of Ontario. And when I became premier, I swore an oath. I made a commitment to you. And this is a responsibility that I take very seriously. So please know everything I've done during every briefing, every phone call, every decision, and every press conference, I've done my absolute best. I put my heart and soul into keeping that commitment to protect, support, and guide this province through some of the darkest days in our history. To never stop working until we put this pandemic behind us forever. Thank you, and God bless the people of Ontario.
Notice the glass of what I'm assuming is clean drinking water from a tap. Justin Trudeau, do your damn job and get clean drinking water to all Indigenous communities now. Let's make something very clear. Doug's apology was not sincere. If he actually cared about the people of the province and not just his wealthy friends, this whole mess could have been mitigated or avoided. His full press conference was over a half hour long, and in it he blatantly lies, contradicts himself, and makes promises he has no intention of implementing. For time's sake, I'll only note a couple of things. His comment about acting too fast was not in relation to his performance over the month, but to something specific from CBC. The decision by Premier Doug Ford and his cabinet to give police arbitrary powers and shut playgrounds across Ontario was made in a rush and without evidence that the move would help rein in the third wave of COVID-19. Multiple sources tell CBC News. Various sources close to the government say the decision came amid panic over the latest modeling for the pandemic and fears that Ford's approval among voters would suffer badly if he was not seen to be taking action. Doug is not sorry for his devastating handling of this. He's sorry about the part he got called out on by the international crowd, which could lead to his approval rating to drop. Doug has said from the beginning, the buck stops with me, and yet, as I've already covered, he has put the blame on the people, workplaces, the opposition leader, and the Prime Minister. Not once has he taken responsibility for what he has done. At one point, he apologizes for losing composure. He doesn't need to apologize for showing genuine emotion. He only apologized to draw attention to a fake emotional response because he's using it to manipulate people into thinking he cares. On a side note, if Doug had been a woman or a female presenting folk and cried at a press conference, their career would have been over by the time the cameras shut off. But since it was Ford, his demonstration of mimicking human compassion worked. People in the mainstream media applauded him for this, and some are even willing to give him a pass on all the bad things he's done. Very much like when Trump did a single good thing and the press fawned over him saying that was the day he became leader. Here are a couple of examples. From reporter Cynthia Mulligan. New, people are now dying of COVID-19 at home. This hasn't been seen before, according to Ontario's coroner, Dr. Hoyer, at today's medical briefing. They are staying at home sick and getting more seriously ill faster until it's too late. Wow, that's pretty serious. It's very heavy. Oh, right, she was at the press conference earlier that day. I wonder what she was saying about that. Premier Ford chokes back tears as he speaks about the hardships people are enduring through COVID-19. Then the scene froze. I have never seen him this emotional before. Seriously, what the hell? What the hell was that? From the National Post. Ford's government approval rating falls to just 35% amid growing frustration. More than 60% of Ontarians disapprove of how Ford government has responded to the COVID crisis, the poll also found. That's some pretty serious news. I hope they go into more information about why this is the case. Here is another National Post article from the exact same day. From Michael Tape? Something. Apology shows Ford is a changed man and deserves a chance to lead. Calls for the Premier to resign, ignore failings of other leaders, and aren't driven by logic. We gave him a chance. He failed. He has already failed, and people have died because of it. And all the other leaders who have failed, they also need to go. With the media sending out mixed messages, it's easy to understand how this phony display of emotion can work in Doug's favor with the people who aren't plugged into the news. Don't become complacent by the fact his current approval ratings have dropped and think he's done. His approval can change overnight, and it indicates very little as to how an election will go because we don't elect people based on a popular vote. Doug can still win the next election, even if it were held today. I also want to remind people why we have him as a leader in the first place. When the last election cycle was wrapping up, the Liberals knew they had no chance of winning, and instead of supporting the NDP to help defeat Ford, they did everything they could to sabotage the NDP's chances. They'd rather have a government that fails versus one that succeeds. Why? Because the Liberals knew if Doug got in, he would be horrible and they would have a better chance of being elected next time. And if the NDP got in, there would be a good chance this province would stay NDP for many cycles. The Liberals prioritized their job security over the lives of the people in Ontario. So where are we today? Despite promising the best sick leave program during his apology performance, the Conservatives have since voted down another bill for paid sick leave, again trying to lay the issue on the federal government's lap. Finally, on April 28th, the Ford government announced a paid sick leave program of 3 days for people who have been impacted by COVID and COVID only. If you're sick from something else, go to work and spread it. This doesn't go nearly far enough, considering if someone is exposed to COVID, they could potentially be ordered to self-isolate by public health unit for 10 to 14 days. And this is a temporary program which will end at the end of September, so don't get sick after that. And since this is to be administered by the WSIB, freelance and gig economy workers won't qualify for the provincial program. It's unknown how soon workers can apply for it, so I'll believe it when I see it. The rollback of police powers was vague, and from Global News. Toronto Police launching dedicated COVID-19 teams in each division to target large gatherings. But like before, how can we trust them to target only large gatherings and not harass people for being out of their homes? Speaking of large outdoor gatherings, there are anti-lockdown rallies and parades happening regularly with people not social distancing or wearing masks, and very few tickets have been handed out as a result. I'm all for people having a right to protest, including when I don't agree with them, but they should be following the health guidelines when doing so or be fined. These events are going to spread COVID and draw out this pandemic even longer. Section 22 is now being implemented to all workplaces with 5 or more active COVID cases, much to the disdain of the corporations who want people to go to work even if it means their lives are at risk. Again, these are doctors forcing the issue. It isn't the province doing the right thing. There are lineups for vaccines that stretch for blocks in low-income racialized neighborhoods. This is a snapshot of a video taken in Scarborough of a lineup that was devastatingly long of people waiting for the vaccine. People in need of non-emergency but life-saving surgeries are being forced to wait. I advise you not to need any sort of emergency help from hospitals for the next while. Patients at hospitals are being airlifted hundreds of kilometers away to hospitals with available room or being transferred to long-term care homes without consent of them or their family. People like me who want a vaccine still have to wait weeks to months before receiving our first shot. People have lost jobs and are in financial crisis. Make no mistake about it, Doug is responsible for mass social murder. There's a link below to an article that explains what this is. The short of it is, Doug has put in place or removed policies which will lead to an early and unnatural death of people. So many people have died who didn't need to. Many families are mourning the loss of loved ones. Recently, there was the heartbreaking death of 13-year-old Emily Victoria Vegas. Her younger brother noticed she wasn't moving in her bed and raced to get their father. He called for help, but it was too late to save her. Doug, you did this. You killed that little girl. More people are being found passed away in their homes as the onset of the newer variants of COVID can be rapid. Many people don't seek medical attention when they first start feeling ill because they can't afford to take the time off work to get tested or to be sick. They have no choice but to go into work. And before people get on my case about it, yes, the federal government also holds responsibility for the dire situation we're in. As NDP Matthew Green so eloquently states, PM Trudeau needs to use the Emergency Act preceded with parallel vaccine rollouts in Ontario ASAP. Doug Ford is f***ing up. Also, check out my video about Jake Tapper covering this story for more information. Oh, that's a lot of information. Wow, okay. So this video has been pretty heavy to put together, and I'm sure for those of you who have made it this far, it was hard to watch. I felt it was important to make this video so people are aware of the extent of the problem and how much Doug Ford has harmed Ontario. The situation doesn't have to be hopeless. We have the power to make change. Share this video, inform other people of what is happening. Don't assume your relatives in rural towns knows the same information you do. We can protest while wearing masks and social distancing. We can call our MPPs and let them know their jobs are on the line. If we apply enough pressure, and I want to stress non-violent, non-threatening pressure, we can give Doug the option of resigning now or being voted out. And it's not enough to vote him out, but every single one of the Conservative MPPs who have supported and enabled him, and the Liberal MPPs who willfully set this province up for failure. The only way the Conservatives can redeem themselves as human beings will be to call for a vote of confidence and vote Ford out before the next election. We can pressure them to do this. What's happening now, while it's exacerbated by Ford's incompetence, isn't the fault of him alone. It has been years and political leanings in the making, both federally and provincially. We deserve better, and we have other options like the NDP. If, like me, you feel the NDP doesn't go far enough, it is up to us to get involved and push them in the direction of progressive progress. This is doable. A better future is doable, but it relies on us to make that happen. Wishful thinking won't change this. Concrete actions will. Get informed, get involved. Thank you for watching this video and supporting my channel. Please continue that support by hitting buttons, following me on Twitter, and by becoming a Patreon. Salut, à la prochaine. I'm Sandy, wishing your tomorrow is better than your today.